All right. Meantime, the nation continues to watch the developments in Baltimore. Peaceful demonstrations over the death of a black man in police custody were overshadowed by violent protests this week following the young man's funeral. They were the worst riots in that city since 1968. And the civil unrest comes at a time when several black men have died at the hands of police in other cities over the past year. I mean, this was the story of the weekend, and I don't think that that you could go by a day without checking in and seeing what's happening in Baltimore. What was interesting to me, though, is every article that I read about Baltimore or column that was happening, Stephen, they also mentioned Detroit and the fact that the similarities between the cities and the makeup, some of the poverty and some of the policing problems.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're very similar places in terms of the population. There are some key differences, too. Baltimore's poverty is really, really concentrated in very dense areas. I mean, it's still a city of row houses, in some cases 100 row houses on a block, each with 5 or 6 people living in it. That's a much different kind, it gives poverty a much different sort of tinge than it does here, where it's really spread out over a large area and people are more isolated. But the factors that have gone into why people are so upset in Baltimore are exactly the same as they are here. You know, it's poverty, it's lack of opportunity. It is a feeling that every authority figure you ever deal with treats you with disrespect and sees you as part of the problem or a criminal. You know, that's common not just in Baltimore and Detroit, but in cities all over the country.
Sadly, I don't think what happened in Baltimore this week was a surprise for a lot of people, Nolan, but when you saw it happening over the weekend and into Monday, what went through your mind?
Well, I mean, you have opportunistic hooliganism going on here. You know, there's now an expectation that an incident like this happens, and before we even know the facts, we've got to start burning down our communities. And I think the officials in these communities, the police chief was a disaster this week. The officials at all levels have to start saying, you know, this is not acceptable. We're going to stop defending this. We're going to stop making excuses for it. We're going to say, you know, this kind of destructive violence doesn't help anybody. And you want to protest. But in this case, let's find out what the heck happened first. Justice is a process. You know, the people walking in the street demanding justice, you don't get justice like that. We got to figure out what happened first, and then there's a process to follow. They're not going to drag these police officers out and burn them at the stake. I don't know what more they can ask for than a suspension, an investigation, and a process going forward. They're way too early to be talking about being denied justice.
Well, I think the frustration is not with the specifics of this case or the delay in information about this case. It is how this case fits into the larger narrative, and that the people, most of whom were protesting peacefully. I mean, let's remember, it is a distinct minority of people who were tearing up and burning up stuff in Baltimore. Most of the people who were out in West Baltimore were protesting very peacefully. But what they're protesting is the system that permits this to go on over and over again without bigger changes in the way that people are policed, and the way that communities have control over who's policing them. That's what people, I think, are upset about, and that's what people are upset about, not just there, but in other cities.
So if you're Detroit and you're watching this, you're James Craig, what are you thinking?
You know, I'm thinking, I think you're again holding your breath, thinking that let's not have something like that happen here, and you're trying to turn toward what is the problem? What is the disconnect between the community and the police? How often are these things happening here? I'm sure he's on top of that and trying to figure out how can we do it? How can we do it better? You know, the irony here is that people in poor neighborhoods need the police more than almost anybody else. They're the ones who live in the neighborhoods where there's so much crime and danger, but they don't need police who are going to treat them with disrespect and kill them for minor transgressions. There's a disconnect here between what the needs of the community are and what the police are doing, and that's what needs to be addressed.
Unfortunately, I feel that we're going to see this again somewhere along the line in some other city, and you say, okay, so we need to have this larger conversation about something systemic that is happening in the way people feel about how they're interacting with police. And so, Nolan, I almost feel like when are we going to get to this tipping point, or when do we get to this one place where we have that big conversation, or that something happens to change this? Because I feel that this is a cycle that is continuing.
Well, as long as police have guns, folks are going to get shot. So your choice here is just let's have officers without guns, or arm the officers, and in some encounters, there are thousands of encounters a day between police and citizens. Most of it is resolved the way it should be. You have isolated incidents here and there. How many people have been shot this year in Detroit? How many citizens?
Sure.
I mean, it's rarely a week or two goes by without somebody getting shot. I mean, you've got some countries where cops don't have guns. We have to make that sort of choice, I guess.
I don't think the question is whether cops should have guns or not. It's how they use them and when they use them.
Most of them are going to use them appropriately, and most police go through their whole careers without firing a shot.
They do.
There's going to be situations where people get shot.
But what we're seeing on video most of the time now is police responding with deadly force to situations that really don't call for it. And and it's not one, it's not isolated incidents, it's a lot of them. And the connection here is, again, that relationship between police and the community. Who do you think you're serving when you put on that badge and get in a car and go patrol?